Okay, so I'll hand over to Steve. So Steve, we've heard he's working with 39 county associations. He also does a lot of private consulting work with various parish and town councils. Imagine he's been out and about a lot in the last few months. So we've asked him to come back and speak at Scribe Academy for the VAT chat. What is trending right now? So over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, John. I'm just going to share my slides. By the way, I was with a council the other day, or I was talking to a council the other day, and they are using Sage for some reason, historical reason, and I have suggested that they ought to be using a package designed for the sector, and I think your name was mentioned, so I will be looking for my commission bit if they decide to come in your direction.
I'll pay you in a pint of beer. How about that next time I see you?
Funnily enough, I have actually done some VAT work, and the charge was 1 pint of beer if demanded. And that was simply because, and I'm off topic, but that's simply because I'd done some, it was one of those, again, it was a charitable trustee situation. And I'd done the advice for the charity, which was delivering the project, but the council also needed to be covered. So I basically gave them the same report with a different letterhead on it. And I just put 1 pint of beer down for the quote because I thought I'm not going to charge the council anything separately. But the clerk had got their money's worth, and everything's fine. So there we go.
Probably your best.
So yeah, I am still waiting though, it has to be said. So I'm going to start at taxable, and I know not all parish councils are VAT registered, probably only about 10% are, but understanding when you have taxable business activity before you start doing it just avoids that mistake of delivering a taxable business activity and discovering you should have been VAT registered. We've had a couple of years ago I think it was Kent, where it's usually a councillor, I'm afraid. A councillor says, I know all about VAT and we don't need to register till we get to £85,000. And unfortunately, that's not actually true. And in their case, they had £60,000 of turnover from taking over and running their cafe bar thing very successfully, but they owed £10,000 of it in VAT. And of course, the councillor didn't stick his hand in his pocket and say, sorry, that's my fault. I'll give you your 10 grand back. So it's a kind of a key area that we need to be concerned about at local council level. It's particularly of concern because unregistered councils are not entitled to reclaim VAT when they undertake a taxable business activity like running a cafe, selling goods from a shop, or charging for car parking, all of which are taxable activities. So you can't reclaim VAT on the costs, which means you can't claim back on your coffee machine if you're selling the coffee. You can't claim VAT back on resurfacing your car park if you're charging for it, and it can have a significant impact. And with most things in the local council sector, if you get it wrong, you get mildly told off. If you in the local council sector, if you fail to submit your audit on time, and it comes in 6 months later, you may get a public interest report. You may get some comments about your council, but there's not a huge penalty. And if you contrast that with Companies House, if you're a day late at Companies House, it's 150 quid. If you're more than a month late, it's 350 quid. But the time your accounts are a year late, I think it's about £1,500 fine. So it's quite significant. With VAT, if you claim back stuff you shouldn't, if you fail to charge something that you shouldn't, HMRC will simply turn around and say, we want this amount from you. And they may penalise you with a penalty and charge you interest back to when you should have done the thing you should have done. So there is a real world financial consequence, and sometimes it's quite big if you have been running, delivering £200,000 worth of cafe sales or something like that. You may need to register for VAT. The law actually says if you make any taxable sales, you're liable to be registered for VAT as a local council. You're different from any other organisation in the country. So if you think about that, that means if you have one zero-rated sale, if you sell a book that's zero-rated for £5 and there is no VAT due, the law actually says you're liable to be registered. HMRC are not that bothered, we'll be honest. If you have no VAT to pay them, they're really not bothered whether you do or not. But they do take a stance that if you make regular taxable supplies, they are going to be looking for you to be registered. It's not going to affect you with the one-off things, but the most common ones we have seen over the last couple of years, and kind of particularly really since we came out of lockdown and we had all that encouraging people to go out, eat out to help out, and all that kind of stuff. We've seen more people doing this. So probably the biggest area councils get caught on, bars, cafes, catering, because they're the kind of things. HMRC's approach is generally, if the VAT you would charge on your sales is more than £1,000, that's the point at which they'd expect registration. You can do that running a bar in an evening if it's a really big event. You can certainly do it in a cafe in probably your first month of trading. If you're providing catering, by which I mean like providing meals for meetings in a venue or something like that, that can stack up quite quickly if you're actually providing buffet lunches and things like that, rather than just the odd sandwich or biscuit or whatever. So they're probably the most common one. And they're probably the most common in terms of issues simply because you get there very quickly. The cafe I said about £200,000. They've been running for about 18 months. They probably went over the point of needing to register in the first month of running the cafe, and they just take 18 months to think about it and get around to taking some advice on it. Another area that catches people is admission to things like events. And for example, things like firework events catch people, and very often it's almost an accidental trend. We've done a couple of these for fireworks where originally the council said, "Oh, we'll do this. We'll do a free firework event. It'd be lovely." And then they decide, perhaps after the next one, think, "Oh, that's really good. Let's ask people if they would donate towards the event." And they have a bucket or collection or whatever, and people donate money towards the event at the end. And then somebody has a bright idea of let's charge admission. We'll sell tickets. People can pay in advance, and they don't realise that going from please give us a donation to it's £5 if you want to come in means it's a taxable sale, and you may need to be registered for VAT. And the one we've done most recently, they'd been going for years. They owed about £10,000. There was probably £1,000 of VAT for every year that they had been doing it, because they probably had £5,000 of ticket sales or something like that. That's not huge. That's 500 tickets at £10. It's not necessarily an enormous event that they have been doing. Similarly, things like film shows. If you're doing and we see people do this, they have a weekly or monthly film show in their public hall, and somebody comes in, does all the stuff, and the council sells tickets as you would normally do with the cinema. And may not be huge individually, but if you're doing it weekly or monthly, it stacks up quite quickly in terms of the revenue that you might generate, particularly if you're showing a popular film. So again, those kind of things, and very often it's one of those things the council drifted into it. Sometimes it started off as we did a film show, and then somebody said, "Will you do some more?" And we went from doing one to doing 2 or 3 a year to suddenly doing a monthly or a weekly show, and we suddenly go from a few £100s to a few £1,000s to sometimes quite sizable sums. I've mentioned car parks. The Isle of Wight fought all the way to the Supreme Court trying to get their public car parks treated as non-business. They didn't succeed, but we're still getting, and that was 2015. I think the case finally went through the Supreme Court, but we are still getting people who have been running car parks and not charging VAT, not paying over any VAT, not registering. Our approach is we generally take the date of the court decision as the point at which they had, and it was clear that they had to start charging VAT, rather than being pushed all the way back to when they first started providing a car park. But we've done a number of those as backdated registrations for people where they have, and sometimes they've been beach car parks and things like that, where literally people just drive on the beach, park the car. There's no real maintenance costs to the facility other than collecting the money off people, because the tide comes in every day and levels the car park out again for you, so it's quite nice from that perspective. But it adds up, and even at small council, we did one for small council, and they were literally about £5,000 a year though, but they should have been charging £1,000 or so of VAT, and that's about £7,000 going back to 2016. So it's quite a significant chunk for a small council again. So it's important. The important message with it is find out before you start charging people whether you need to register, whether you should be charging VAT, whether it's okay, because if you find out before, you can change your prices. Before you tell anybody how much it is to park or buy a sandwich or come to the film show, if you know beforehand, you can set your prices. If you set your prices and you only find out afterwards, after they've paid, enjoyed the film, and gone away again, you can't turn around and say, can we have 20% more, please? It's not going to work like that. So knowing in advance avoids any nasty surprises. The other thing with car parking, boat moorings are treated the same. So boat moorings are a taxable supply as well. You charge VAT on them. And again, it's surprising how many councils we've encountered that do have river moorings, harbour moorings, and things like that. And another one that's caught at least one council, and we've had another inquiry about it, providing a holiday accommodation. So that can be providing a cottage or something like that. But it also involves providing a site for tents, or indeed a site for somebody else to put holiday chalets on, providing the site itself still counts as holiday accommodation. It's still a taxable supply. And one that we've done, for example, they have been providing a site for holiday accommodation since 1990. Never registered for VAT, never charged VAT on anything. Even their solicitor didn't know that they were supposed to be charging VAT. So it was a bit of a shock to everybody concerned. So making sure you get the right advice before you start doing these things is kind of critical. I'm just looking. Emma said, would permits to park a car park be vatable? Yeah, anything where you grant somebody the right to park a vehicle in a particular place or a general place will be vatable. Similarly, Rose, I can see, has said, should we have charged VAT on mugs that we were selling? Yes, is the answer to that. Your county council is probably, I hate to say this, your county council is probably not an expert on anything unless they have a particular job where they are an expert. So, right, just bear with me. So kind of taxable stuff is the first big thing. So when are we liable to be registered? As I said, the Act says if you make any taxable supplies, you're liable to be registered. HMRC don't apply that too strictly, but they will expect you to register and they will be willing to enforce registration on you if the VAT that you would charge to customers would exceed £1,000 per annum. So that's, if you think at 20%, that's £5,000 plus VAT, £1,000, £6,000 of sales. It's much lower than the £85,000 registration threshold. If it's lower than that, and particularly if it's like a one-off thing, they're really not going to be terribly bothered because it's not worth their effort to maintain your registration any more than it is worth for you. So we have had people say, we've sold 300 quid worth of something, do I need to register for VAT? Probably not, is the answer at that sort of level, as long as it's the only thing you're selling. So I said the 85,000. The important thing with registration is you have to get your date right. So in several cases, like I said, with the car parking, if they should have been doing it for a long time, in a lot of cases, the registration date has either been the 1st of January 2016 or the 31st of March 20 or the 1st of April 2016, because they should have paid VAT from the date that they started doing the thing. And the fact that you didn't register on time doesn't mean you don't have to pay any tax. It doesn't work like that. Yeah. So with a failure to register is one of those oddities. With a failure to register, HMRC can actually go back 20 years. So if you should have registered in 2004, for example, they could make you go back to 2004 and pay the VAT from 2004 and pay interest on the amounts that you haven't paid and potentially fine you a penalty as well. So it's not just a case of, do we need to register now? Sometimes it's a case of, how much do we owe going back up to 20 years on what we have been doing? So as I say, it's really critical that you take advice if you are not sure in these particular circumstances. I'm just going to have a quick look at questions here. That's exciting in there. If you've got there are requirements set out in the guidance as to what you expect on a VAT receipt, but that does normally include what rate of VAT you're being charged. You can't guess and you can't put your own figures on if you don't get a proper receipt. how easy is it to deregister? I think to deregister the council, you need to be sure that you're not making any regular taxable supplies, because obviously it's not like the deregistration threshold, which has just gone up. They've just put the registration threshold up to £90,000 into the budget. I think that takes effect from April. And the deregistration threshold is about £2,000 lower. But for council, the question is, are you making any regular taxable supplies? So even if it's less than £1,000 after you've registered, if you're going to be continuously supplying stuff you should charge VAT on, then they may not let you. If you stop, and we have had, for example, we've had people stop doing a taxable activity because they sold the site or they decided not to continue with the activity. So if you have no taxable activities, you can simply send the form in to deregister, but they may ask you some questions. Yeah, Angela, the amount of councils we get that they're VAT registered, but they have no idea why they're VAT registered. It is quite a common thing. If you're an old, want of a better word, parish council, an awful lot registered in 1974 because they thought they had to, or 75, and have just been registered ever since without regard. But I can't answer why your council registered when it did, because I might have been at school at the time. So, that's how far back we are talking. Right, and I'm just looking at the questions. If you are running voluntarily, you can register at any point, is an easy answer to that one. And if volunteers are running something, it depends whether they are running it for the council and the council gets the money, in which case you account for it, you have to charge VAT, or whether they're doing it off their own bat as a community thing and they're just covering their costs, or they donate the money to charity or something. So if you're not in the chain, if you don't receive the money, you don't pass the money to anybody, somebody else is doing it, somebody is liable if it goes wrong, then it's nothing to do with you and you don't need to account for it.
Steve, I advise to not upset your flow. Go through the slides and then we can do the Q&A and R afterwards. So that, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So moving on then. So we'll leave the taxable business activities behind. Non-business activities are the kind of stuff you do on a day-to-day basis, council, providing freely available services and facilities to the public. So you don't charge somebody every time they come and uses it. It's there, it's paid for by the council taxpayer. You don't check whether somebody's a registered elector or a council taxpayer before they sit on your bench or walk into your park and stuff. So we can also treat as non-business where we charge for things that we have to provide under a statutory duty, and that includes allotments, burials, public toilets particularly. It also includes where we grant a lease where we don't really charge anything. We notionally charge £1 for a lease, but we don't actually charge a proper rent or anything. We can treat that as a non-business activity as well. So essentially we're making land freely available to somebody else. We can deal with that. And that's what Section 33 of the VAT Act allows you to do. Where it's non-business, where you're paying with council taxpayer funds, residents' funds, we can reclaim the VAT because that's not a business activity. We're not charging people for services. We're funding it all from taxation, regardless of whether you want it or not, if we're honest, when we look at taxation. When we come to sport, and you may have seen, hopefully, last year we published a bulletin in February, which we updated in March, about the fact that HMRC decided that we could, well, not HMRC, to be fair, let's be fair, the courts decided that we could treat sports as a non-business activity in certain circumstances. Okay, we updated our guidance in November because HMRC did provide a little bit of more information finally. So it's still an evolving picture. There are some discrepancies that don't make any sense at all, but you won't be surprised because it's VAT and there's lots like that. But basically where we are at the moment. So the things we can treat as non-business for sports are where somebody's paying you to use a sports facility as an individual. So people paying to hire a football pitch or a rugby pitch or whatever, people paying to hire a tennis court or similar badminton court, people paying to participate using facilities like a swimming pool, a gym or anything like that, or to participate in a sport that you're putting on and charging people for. So where people are, the important thing is they are doing sport in a place that is designed for sport, like a swimming pool, a football pitch or whatever. And as long as we're supplying that to members of the public rather than to a kind of a commercial business for the benefit of its own interest, we can treat those as a non-business activity, which means we don't have to charge VAT. Even if you've opted to tax, we still don't charge VAT because an option to tax does not apply to non-business activity. And we can reclaim the VAT as non-business, even though we're not VAT registered. So it's a big win for councils providing sports facilities. It doesn't apply to things that we also do at the same time, which are not actually sports. So if you supply sandwiches, any sort of catering to people while they're doing sports, that is a taxable supply of catering, not a supply of sports or sports facilities. Similarly, if we sell goods, if we sell them a cricket bat or a pair of swimming trunks, that's a sale of goods. It's not a supply of a sport facility or sporting activity. Any kind of clothing. And again, if we charge them for parking their car before they do the thing, again, that is not a charge for the sporting activity. That's a charge for parking your car, and it's taxable. There are some things excluded from the left-hand column. It's arguable whether this is fair or right, or whether it would stand up in court, but this is the current position that HMRC are adopting. So certain supplies of the facilities remain VAT exempt unless you put an option to tax in place, in which case they're taxable. So if you lease, rather than just hiring a football pitch out, if you lease your site to a club that then maintains the pavilion and maintains the football pitches at their expense, that is still a VAT exempt lease of property, not a supply of sports facility. I'd love to see that one go to court because I think the court will walk all over them, but that's HMRC's current position. Similarly, if you have a sporting site and you hire it for a non-sporting purpose, for example, if you have a football pitch, you hire it out for car boot sale, that's not sporting use, so that's still VAT exempt hire of land, not use of a football pitch. So, yeah, so we have to distinguish between, if we use their football pitch, are we using it to play football, or are we leasing it out for somebody to park their cars on and have a car boot sale instead? Similarly, if you have a sports pavilion that you may use for changing for your cricket or whatever, but you also hire the room out for meetings, sitting down and having a meeting is not sport. Okay, so we are not participating in sport by sitting and looking at our screens. It doesn't count. Okay, so we have to be careful that we don't try and apply the sporting rules to things that are not connected with sports. Okay. Beyond that, if you haven't seen the bulletin, talk to your county association, because even if your county association is not one of our 39, and I'll be honest, Mark Mulberry administers most of the others that don't use our services, all of the county associations have seen our bulletin because we sent it to everybody because it was that level of importance. So if you're not sure, do ask. There is a 4-year cap. So if you haven't been claiming if you haven't gone and asked for your sports VAT back, you can only go back 4 years. So at the moment, you can still claim for the January to March quarter of 2020, which was 4 years ago, but you won't be able to after the 1st of April. So you will lose out 3 months worth of potential reclaim if you haven't done it yet. So reclaiming VAT. I've talked about Section 33 allowing you to reclaim. What it doesn't allow you to do, and again, this is an area where lots of councils go wrong, is it doesn't allow you to reclaim VAT where somebody else is paying and benefiting. You can't buy stuff on behalf of somebody else, give them their stuff, and they give you the net amount. They don't have to pay VAT. It doesn't work like that. That's called fraud. And unfortunately, it's the council committing the fraud, not the party that manages to avoid paying VAT. So the council would be liable for any VAT that it wrongly claimed in those circumstances. A good example of this is where you do work to somebody else's building and they give you the money. So, for example, a village hall that is not the council's village hall, it's not council owned, it's a charity hall, but they want you to commission the work and get the work done, and they will give you the money so you can claim the VAT back. It doesn't work like that. You're not entitled to reclaim their VAT for them. If you do that, you are making a taxable supply of building services. You need to be registered for VAT, and you need to charge VAT to the village hall. So you can't try and put it through to get around it. And people often say, oh, put a claim in, it was paid. Pretty much all tax in the UK is self-assessed. I have to do mine. I have to declare what I've earned, and I have to work out and pay the right amount of tax on it. If I lie about how much I've earned and I don't pay the right amount of tax, it doesn't mean I've got away with it, because they may catch me and I could still get locked up. And every week I get a thing through, I get a bulletin through that tells me all the latest juicy things where somebody's being taken to court. There's one recently, it's over 70 million pounds worth of VAT. Yeah, so people do get taken to court for amounts that they're not paying. So the fact that you've put in the claim for something you shouldn't have done doesn't mean you've got away with it. It just means you haven't been sentenced yet. Okay, so just bear that in mind. And if you're the person that filled in the VAT claim, you are the person that has declared that you're being honest and you've done all the right stuff. So you are as vulnerable as your counsel is if you make false declarations or you make reckless declarations about what you have done. Similarly, buying goods for others, and we see this a lot. The council orders a load of cleaning materials and toilet rolls and whatever else for the village hall, give them stuff to the village hall, and the village hall pay them less VAT and avoid paying VAT. Again, it's not legal. Yeah, it's not that you're not actually buying the goods. The village hall's buying the goods. They're liable for the VAT, not you. If you put yourself in that chain, again, you should be registered because you are buying goods and selling them to somebody else. And you should be charging VAT, or if it's a small amount, you shouldn't be reclaiming the VAT on it. It can go easily wrong there. But we're still seeing that. And I have been saying this for probably 20 years now in VAT sessions for local councils, but we still get it happening. Similarly, if somebody gives you a donation towards something, that's great. But if they give you a donation on the basis that they then want exclusive use of the thing they've just donated to you, they're paying a fee for a privilege that they want to get in return. So again, that's not really a donation. They're paying for a service, and you need to think about whether that service is taxable or not. As a trend thing, because John did want what's trending, we have had a council in the north, which way we go, northeast, challenged over members of staff buying stuff online using their debit cards or whatever and reclaiming the VAT back from the council. They have taken the view that they're not allowed to do that. I think they're wrong. We're very confident they're wrong because that's what you're allowed to do in business, in a VAT registered business. The SIP VAT committee is meeting with HMRC today. They think they're wrong as well, and they have agreed to raise it with them and point out that they're wrong. But their meeting could drag on forever, so I don't know when we're going to hear back from them. So it's not something to worry about, and we will update people. But just an example of how these things can come about. Probably a relatively new VAT office has looked at something and said, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing that," without fully thinking about the consequences of what they're doing. So do go away and take advice if HMRC says. I had somebody the other day say, "We were told we can't reclaim VAT on Christmas lights. HMRC don't pay back VAT on Christmas lights." That's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. Did they come straight off the boat and just started working for HMRC and they haven't learned anything yet? And I even spoke to one of the biggest Christmas light suppliers in the UK because I know them quite well. And I said, "Have you ever heard this?" And they just laughed. And they do £150,000 worth of lights for one big unitary authority, and it's just not an issue. So quite why sometimes you do get a random individual asking your VAT question and answering your VAT question at HMRC, and they don't necessarily. So I'm going to talk about Village Hall because, as I said earlier, this is kind of thing we have seen a lot. We seem to have done far too many charitable village halls over the last 12 months or so. They're always a bind because nobody knows where the documentation is. The nice bit of paper they had in 1928 seems to have gone walkabout, and it's all down to hearsay, and somebody in their 90s can vaguely remember something. And it's very, very hard to advise when you haven't got a clue what you're doing, if I'm honest. So there are kind of 4 options, and I was expecting the words to be on the slide, to be honest. So I'm just going to do this and see what happens. So we've got a couple of things. So if it's a council hall, if it's a public authority owned hall, then that may be run by the council. And we have examples of those where the council simply meet all the costs. They charge people for using the hall, It's part of the council's business activity, etc. We also see them where the council owns them and then leases them to somebody else for £1 because the council really doesn't want to run a village hall. They'd like somebody else to do it. But it's a public asset that they actually own, and it's their choice to do that. So how do we deal with those? If your council's owning it, hiring out rooms, it's going to be a VAT exempt business activity. The rules about VAT exempt activities apply, and we'll look at those in a moment. If you're leasing it to somebody else for £1, it's a non-business activity. As long as you don't get any other income, you don't get any of the rent, you can treat that as non-business, claim back any VAT that you incur on maintaining the building for somebody else to use. But we get the trustee ones. And councils don't always know whether they are or what the difference is or whatever. So if you are a sole managing trustee, effectively you own the building. You hold it in trust, but you're completely responsible for everything that goes on in it. You look after it. You can run it as a completely separate entity as a charity. You should keep the separate accounts. There are some particular rules. We're not going to go into them in depth, but there are circumstances where you can reclaim some of the VAT because you're a council acting as a sole trustee. But it's important, and the ones where they go wrong is it's important to know the difference between that and a custodian trustee. And we get lots of people who are custodian trustees that we own the building, but actually, legally, they own the legal title. They hold the building in trust. They own the legal title, but they don't make any of the decisions about running the facility. They don't make those ongoing decisions, etc. That is down to the trustees of the charity. And essentially, HMRC do not regard that as your building. It's not yours to spend on it, and you cannot reclaim VAT on behalf of the trustees or when using trust funds, even if the trustees give them to you and go, here you are, you spend this and you can reclaim the VAT. It doesn't work like that. So if you're dealing with a trust situation, be absolutely clear about whether you are sole managing trustee, whether you're the custodian trustee, whether somebody else is the trustee and it's nothing to do with you at all, because people get very confused and it can go very wrong and it can get very expensive. And I've got one literally yesterday where they basically, we have done this. Yeah, we have done this. If you've done it wrong, I can't undo it for you. Yeah, take advice before you get to the we have done something. Find out whether you're doing it right. And if not, you can avoid the pitfalls. Once you've done it, you can't give the money back and say, sorry, can we just pretend that didn't happen? It doesn't work like that. Okay, so I'm thinking this is probably my last slide. And I'm going to do very quickly. This is my partial exemption with colours. So if it's non-business activity, that's the area you can reclaim all the VAT, and that's a big block, however much it is, without any regard. If you're VAT registered, you can reclaim VAT on your taxable business activity. If you're not VAT registered, that's the area you cannot reclaim VAT, even when you hope you can. And if you have VAT exempt activities like hiring rooms out, particularly, which is the most likely one you're going to have, then that's the area where you have to work out every year whether you're entitled to reclaim that VAT or not. And that is where, do that again, that is where the £7,500 threshold comes in terms of determining are we entitled to reclaim VAT on that particular piece of activity or not. So the others, both sides are safe. Is the bit in the middle where you do exempt activities. We just need to work out how much VAT falls into that bit. And that is my final slide.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. We've got a bunch of questions. I've categorized them.